and I begin the record.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And first of all, I want to say very sorry for my English, but I will try to present here the preliminary results of our recent excavation in Tanais, the city that was located far from the main centers of the ancient world. So first, a few words about the city. Tanais was the furthest northeastern Greek point in the northern Black Sea region. It's located 30 kilometers west of the modern city of Rostov-on-Don. On the ring bank of the river Don, which in ancient times was called Tanais. It was founded in the first quarter of the 3rd century BC by Bosporan Greeks as one of the latest and furthest center of trade with local tribes for. About 800 years, Tanais was a major economic and cultural center of the West region. Strabo wrote about Tanais. It was the largest barbarian emporium after Pantikapayan. In the early period, city was relatively independent from the metropolis. From time to time, it would agree to become a part of the Bosporus kingdom. At the turn of the 1st century BC, 3rd century AD, according to Strabo, it was destroyed by Bosporan king Polemonian because it wouldn't obey him, and finally was subordinate to Bosporan kingdom. This destruction ended the first period in the story of Tanais. The second part of the second and the first part of the 3rd century AD was the period of economic prosperity of the city. Excavations have revealed numerous house complexes that possess paved country yards with water collecting cistern in the center. Each house complex had one or several cellars. At the beginning of the 5th of the 3rd century AD, Tanais was destroyed by tribes of the Gothic Union. Almost a century later, in the 4th century AD, life in the city was resumed. And continued until the end of the 5th century AD. Archaeological research on the territory of the Tanais settlement has been carried out since 1853. Now, the following parts of the city have been identified. The upper city, which includes Citadel, the western urban area, and the western suburb. They were not restored after the destruction of the end of the 1st century BC, and the lower city. Our excavation took place in the south part of the Citadel, Tanais Citadel. We continue research of our German colleagues, Burkhard Berger and Jürgen Forneiser, which was stopped in 2003. In the course of their researches in the south part of the Tanais Citadel, the remains of public and living buildings, as well as outbuildings, date back from the 2nd century BC to the first half of the 5th century AD were discovered. They began excavating the complex of the large public well, so-called Building 6. Two stone staircases from different time were dug. The late one entirely, and the early one, just a small part. In addition, poorly preserved wall fragments date back to the functioning of the late staircase were partly discovered. Oh. This one and this one. Oh, okay. During the study, it was suggested that it excited from the 2nd century BC to the 2nd century AD. Despite the fact that the work is still going on, we can draw preliminary conclusion about the size, shape, and sequence of erection and reconstruction of the entire structure of the building 6. In addition to previous research that has identified parts of the north and west wall, we have uncovered fragments of 2 walls. It's latest walls, and we have uncovered the earliest walls. They surrounded the building from the east and south in the first period. The walls had an internal front. From their outside, there was a baking of stones between the wall and the rock. Okay. The early structure had an uneven sub-rectangular shape in plan. It was inserted into the rock cliff, the origin of which is still difficult to judge. The total area of the building was over 100 square meters. The area of the tank itself was about 75 square meters. White stone steps lead into the west. There are preserved 6 upper steps, 25-30 centimeters high. The lower ones are completely or partly destroyed. In one moment, the cistern was rebuilt. Yes. It was rebuilt. Its area has been significantly reduced. The eastern part was completely filled up, and this place was covered with a part of the new house. The filling of the eastern part of the cistern took place at the same time as the construction of its new eastern wall did. This is evidenced by a number of points. Firstly, the layer was homogeneous and filled with a large number of broken vessels, most of which can be fixed in complete forms. Apparently, they were broken at the time of the droop. Secondly, we unearthed several layers of ceramic rubble with a noticeable decrease in their level from west to east and towards to the center. Thirdly, parts of the ceramic clusters were intertwined with stones on the eastern face of the new wall, which didn't have any even design. When could this have happened? There are no finds that have a more or less exact date. Most of the pottery date back to the 1st century BC, 2nd century AD. Among them, pseudocone amphora from Heraclea Pontica and the Aegean centers predominate. There are several fragments of colchis and red clay Bosporan amphora, featureless fragments of red slip tableware, and plain pottery of local production. A small amount of Moesian pottery also originates from here. Such forms of vessels were produced by the Cuban merchants during the 1st century BC and the first half of the 1st century AD. In addition, quite a few fragments of molded ceramics of different shapes were found here. However, it's clear that the reason for the reconstruction of such building must have been significant. In addition, for a same time feeling of in addition, for the same time feeling of large volume, with such an amount of not only soil but also ceramics, it was necessary to have large areas for where that very amount of soil and ceramics could have been taken. That is, this event must be correlated with some kind of major destruction of the city, after which its reconstruction was carried out. The only significant event in this chronological period was the destruction of the city by Polemonian at the end of the 1st century BC. The reconstruction of the city after this event took place in the first half of the middle of the 1st century AD. So we can assume that the structure was destroyed during the defeat by Polemonian and restored in a new form, along with the restoration of the entire city. Or it could be, have been rebuilt without prior destruction, close to the middle of the 1st century AD, for another reason, for example, because the water level was changed. The area of the new cistern, also subrectangular in shape, was significantly reduced to about 11 square meters. The entrance was preserved on the western side, but the earliest staircase was not used later. A new one was erected about above it. It was very different from the first one in its size. It was 3 times narrow and had 16 steps. The total height of the new staircase was just over 5 meters. Grooves were made in the new eastern wall. It was being excavated for 4 meters deep. Apparently, this was done in order to set a wooden of the ground floor, as the level of the grooves corresponds to the level of the low edge of the stairs. Perhaps this happened due to change in the water level in the cistern, and the new design was supposed to make it easier to assess it. At the moment, we have dug a cistern to a deep for about 6 meters, and the work is not finished yet. It was filled with a uniform layer and a large number of fragments of pottery and animal bones. Sorry. Okay. It was being filled from the edges towards the center, and apparently it took place spontaneously. Several levels of stones have been cleared at the bottom of the layer. They were a result of the destruction of the lower spans of the earlier stairs and the walls of the buildings. Most of the finds are Heraclean amphora type C, orange clay and Sinopian amphora of the 2nd century AD. A small number are pseudocoan amphora of Heracles production and red clay amphora of Bosporan centers. The group of red slip ceramics is represented first of all by various forms of the Pontic sigillata A, according to Zhuravlev. They date back to the last quarter of the first half of the 2nd century AD. A fragment of one figured vessels is interesting. This one. It was made in the form of a woman's head. The neck, chin, one cheek, and a small part of the carefully made hairstyle have been preserved. This kind of vessels were quite popular in Roman times, but such finds are not so common in Tanais. This specimen by Zhuravlev's definition dates back to the 2nd century AD and is supposedly the product of the one of the Asia Minor workshops. According to the date of the buildings which were erected on this place after the final destruction of the cistern, the final termination of the functioning of the structure refers to the first half, the middle of the 2nd century AD. This correlated with the time of destruction and fires, which were traced in significant part of the city. Researchers associated it with the penetration of nomads of the late Sarmatian culture into the low Don steppe. Several earlier and narrow date finds come from the low fillings level of the cistern. First of all, it was this one, mold bowl glass cylindrical beaker. About half of the vessel has survived. It was found right here. It was blown out in a 3-part negative matrix. The edge was rather poorly processed. The side seams were masked by 2 vertical palm branches. Their walls were ornamented with 3 friezes separated from each other and limited above and below by embossed rollers. The upper and low friezes were white. Each of them contained 6 reefs. A single line Greek inscription was placed in the central narrow frieze. One word survived from it, Naken, from the sentence Slabaten Negen, win the victory. The glass is clear and bluish. About 24 vessels with inscriptions are known in the northern Black Sea region. There are slightly more than in the western Black Sea coast. For example. About 24 glasses with inscription are known in the northern Black Sea region. I'm sorry, but we know only 5 glasses, or they're fragments of exactly this type with just such an inscription on the territory on the northern Pontus. Our was the 4th. The first was found in the 1914 in the surrounding area of Kerch. The second in the 1994 during the excavation of the citadel of Olbia. This was a very small fragment. It has not been published. The third fragment came from Godjipia, and year after hourglass had been found a similar vessel was found in necropolis near the Frontovo village in the southwestern Crimea. This is the group K subgroup 1,3I after Harden. The problem of determining the manufacturing centers of such vessels has not yet been resolved. There are 3 possible production regions. Firstly, this is Syro-Palestinian region, which is famous for the masters of Sidon. Secondly, Cyprus, because the largest number of vessels of this group was found there. And there is an assumption that one of the workshops which worked in the Syro-Palestinian tradition was located in Cyprus. And thirdly, according to Lightfoot, it could be northern Italy, but there are difficulties with the analysis of the chemical composition of Roman glass, their location with the presence of not only primary production, but also with numerous melting, as well as with the supply of raw materials from the Syro-Palestinian region of different parts of the Roman world. According to the last research, based on the analysis of finds from the necropolis of Nona in Dalmatia, the glasses of this group are dated no earlier than the middle and no later than the 3rd quarter of the 1st century AD. Earlier, Kunina suggested that some specimens of this type, which were found in different parts of the Roman world, could have been blown in the same mold. A comparative analysis of 2 glass vessels from Planticapaeum and our fragment confirms this idea. Their size are exactly the same, including the distance between the embossed rollers. The relative position and shape of the reefs, and most importantly, the letter of the inscriptions are absolutely identical. On the vessels from Tanais and Planticapaeum, above the letter E, there is a small protrusion above the intersection of the upper crossbar with the vertical bar. Obviously, this was a defect of the mold. Of the mold. Moreover, it should be noted that the different options of the inscriptions, both in its writing and in its placement, are well known. For a separate group of points, one retrograde and is characteristic is in fact on the Planticapaeum specimen. There are other details in comparison with other inscriptions. The color and quality of the glass are also the same. Thus, despite the incomplete preservation of our glass, with a single degree of probability, it can be argued that it could have been made in the same mold with carved one. How could such a rare glass end up here? Considering the small number of glasses of Group K in the northern Black Sea region, it can hardly be said that they were the subject of trade. Lightfoot and some other researchers have suggested that Roman legionaries contributed to their spread. In Britain and the Rhine region, glass vessels with the inscription were more often found in the cities where they were based. We have no evidence of the placement of Roman legionaries in Tanais, but Traister put forward a different assumption about the finds of certain things that could belong to the Roman legionaries and which were found in different settlements of the Bosporus. Namely, they could have got here together with the soldiers who served as part of the Roman auxiliary units and who returned home. This can rather explain the appearance of Roman glass with an inscription in Tanais. After earlier find, also not having such an interesting history, is a gold lion head array. Such arrays were found in the Tanais necropolis. They date back to the 2nd century BC. These findings, as well as fragments of Sinopian amphorae from the 2nd century BC and fragments of black glass pottery, can be considered a chronological background. They can be evidence of the time of construction and functioning of the cistern. We cannot fail to mention another interesting find. It's a stone ball. It has fairly large size, diameter 24 centimeters, wide 10 kilograms and 600 grams. On both sides, it had a small recess from the clamp for fastening to the machine during toning. Also, stone balls of this size were used in both Hellenistic and Roman times. This is the first such find in Tanais. It was made of marble or marmoreal limestone. Only imported marble was used on our territory. Marmoreal limestone was mined in the Crimea and used and finishing material in conclusion, in construction. And of course, this is not the most common material for making stone balls. There were many other stones in Tanais suitable for making balls. Due to the material, it can be assumed that the ball was caved from a broken statue, for example. We can't say for sure if it was made in Tanais or it could have been made in Panticaprim or Fangoria and came to us during the destruction of the city by Polemonian, for example. So it was the most interesting structure in the southern part of the citadel of Tanais. We know very few cisterns similar in construction in the northern Black Sea region, for example, in the south suburb of Chersonesos Taurica. It is close in size, but the Chersonesian one belongs to an earlier time, and it was carved into the rock, not insert into the rock cliff. Unfortunately, I can't show the photo because it hasn't been published yet. Another cistern was excavated in the rural area of Chersonesos in the 2021, but it's much smaller in size. After reconstruction of this complex, a house was built to the east of the building at the end of the first, the beginning of the 2nd century AD. We have excavated so far 2 rooms and the western part of the country yard. One of the rooms was deepened in relation to the level of the country yard by ½ meters. There was unearthed 2 periods of the reconstruction of this room. We don't know yet what this room was like at first. At the time of the destruction, it was a household room. Stone podium or platform was located in the southeast corner, in place where the entrance, where the entrance was. Yes, entrance of the first period. On it and next to it, fragments of stone. Millstone were found. It's this one. Several small Heraclean and 1 large red clay amphora without a throat. Small Heraclean and red clay amphora were placed against the walls. Burned wooden bars from the ceiling were also found here. Next room, it was a cellar. During the reconstruction of the house, it was rebuilt in a more radical way. In this cellar and yes. Another northern wall was built. As a result, the basement area was significantly reduced. Perhaps such a significant reconstruction was due to the fact that the western part of the basement and the western wall didn't stand on a solid foundation. For example, on a rock or the upper part of early stone walls. You see, yes, you see how the western wall has subsided. The country yard was paved with large flat stones. There was a small staircase in the northern part of it. This one. The steps led to the street. Apparently, this was the entrance to the house. These are the main results of our recent excavation in this part of the city, and I hope that we will have the opportunity to continue our research despite the difficulties of the modern world. Thank you for your attention.